Our guest tonight is Dr. Elizabeth Owings, and she is going to continue the discussion that we've been having this week on the topic of autism. I'm going to switch the screen control to her and tell you just a little bit about her. Dr. Elizabeth Owings is a medical doctor who has served as the chief surgical resident at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, a critical care fellow in the Department of Pediatric Surgery at Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago, and a pediatric surgery fellow at Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital in St. Louis. Her research into the use of vitamins, minerals, and other natural remedies took her through tens of thousands of articles and published research paper, truly making her an expert on natural therapies. She's a delightful person to talk to. I actually love your Alabama accent too, Elizabeth. So welcome. Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly.
All
right, so I'm handing it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to flesh out the whole concept. I'm not an autism expert, but I was very recently at two major conferences. One of them was specifically about autism, and the other was actually my review course to maintain my pediatrics board certification. And there were two completely different, well, not completely different, but very different approaches in concepts about autism. And so I came away with that from both of them with this concept that there was something important that I had gleaned from it, and I wanted to share that with people. So that's the background. And hopefully maybe there's an autism expert out there who would like to redo this talk and do it better. That's fine with me. I have no ego attachment to this. I just want to share some of the information and some of the new concepts that I was presented with, and some of this information really got my attention. So let's see, off we go here. My objectives tonight are we're going to define autism, and I understand Dr. Dolan, made it clear some of these definitions are a little nebulous, and I understand that, but we're at least going to talk about that and talk about what the new paradigms are, because there are old ways of looking at things, or sort of more conventional medical ways of looking at things, and then there's some new things, new information and new ways of looking at it that may offer some management options that we might not otherwise consider. I'd like to share some resources. There's something called the Autism Research Institute, and they have a group called Defeat Autism Now, and this is where I got my what I consider my current up-to-date information about autism and management options. And I'd like to promote study. This is not a comprehensive overview. That would be impossible to do in 1 hour. There's just too much to say and to know about it. But hopefully, for the scientifically inclined, I'll present you with enough information. You'll develop some curiosity and go look for things yourself. And for people who aren't, doctors and nurses and scientists and whatnot, hopefully you'll come out of this, I think, with some hope, a lot of hope, because one of the, I think, things that conventional medicine doesn't necessarily do very well is provide a lot of hope. So one of the things I came out, especially from the Defeat Autism Now lectures with, and it was 2 days. It was 2 full days of serious science, and I'm going to try and distill that and make that understandable for people. But that's what I came out of that with, was there is hope. There's lots of hope. There are people who once were clearly autistic, and now you can't pick them out of a crowd. And that's a huge difference, and that's, I think, a very hopeful concept for people. So let's talk about paradigm shifts at first. And for those of you who were with me last week talking about nutrition in the brain, this slide may look familiar, and that's because I think the paradigm shift applies to autism as well as to anything else going on with the brain and anything else going on with the entire body. And you'll learn that, I'll talk about this, autism may not be just a brain disorder. It may be an entire body disorder that happens to show up in the way people behave. So the paradigm shift with regard to nutrition, when I was in medical school, we learned that the RDAs were set up based on deficiency states. And the RDAs were recommended daily allowance, and they've changed the name 12 times, but the concept is the same, that for 97% of those whose intake is less than the recommended daily allowance, they'll demonstrate a clinical deficiency. So if you give someone the RDA, then there's only a 3% chance that they'll have a clinical deficiency state. Well, that, to me, sort of begged the question, well, then there are people who are getting enough nutrition, yet they have a clinical deficiency. What's wrong with this picture? I hope someone's going to teach me to recognize these people. Of course, they didn't. The other question is, what about the subclinical states? What about people who don't have an obvious deficiency? For example, vitamin D, the obvious deficiency state is something called rickets. And that's why they started fortifying milk with vitamin D several decades ago, was to get rid of rickets. And we now, the cutting-edge thinkers in vitamin D think that there are a whole host of subclinical deficiency states, everything from type 1 diabetes to cancer to heart disease and blood pressure problems. They think all of these may be subclinical vitamin D deficient. Subclinical means the doctor doesn't recognize it, but yet it's a deficiency state. It's a situation where it could be optimized with more of that nutritive substance. The last thing you have to ask is, well, what if I'm in the 97% that gets enough, but I'm not absorbing it? So all these things play a role, and the shifting paradigm is we're coming from an illness and disease focus, I think, in forward-thinking physicians and clinicians. The illness focus or sick care, you may think of it, the concept is, well, you have a symptom and you need to fix that symptom. So if we can treat the cause, we will, but that actually presupposes that that we have a paradigm that includes what the cause actually is and what we can think about. And that's sort of a roundabout way to say that you'll never find a cause if you're not looking for it. And so when we're talking about autism, we're finding out there's not just one cause, but there may be many, many factors. So another thing that happens in sick care is we can turn a symptom into a disease. And it was a major shift in thinking for me when I stopped thinking of high blood pressure as a disease and started thinking of it as a symptom. When I started thinking of it as a symptom, then I could look for things the body might be lacking that might help that symptom disappear. Mm-hmm. So it's more of a restoration of health. You were going to say something?
No, I said that's a really powerful mindset about it. That's great.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And turning a symptom into a disease, good heavens, do you know at some of the psychiatric conventions, they actually have a show of hands. I mean, I have someone who has pick something, a fear of umbrellas. Anyone else have that? Okay, I think that should be a new clinical, entity. All right, and they may vote on it. I mean, that's where we are. And I think the empowerment comes becoming empowered to take care of ourselves and take care of our health. Really comes from saying, well, you know what, I'm going to see if there's something I can do about that rather than just name it. The other thing we find is that we've got, you may have a symptom, you may get a pill, and the pill may have side effects, and you may get another medication for that. It happens often enough that I think it's an issue. And I think a lot of people are now aware, and they go, well, doctor, if all you're going to do is give me a pill, I'll just live with the symptom. Maybe I'll just stay with the symptom until I can find some other solution. And I think that's reasonable. The new paradigm is give your body what it needs to function optimally. And what you need, Sherry, to function optimally may be different from what someone else needs. And we may have to figure that out individual by individual. You may not be able to treat an entire population like a herd of cattle and give them all the same thing. Some people may need more of this or that. And then there's a concept of good enough versus optimal. So the RDA sort of came from a good enough paradigm. And what we're looking at today is more of a wellness paradigm. And what we're looking at is people want to be optimal. They want optimal nutrition. They want optimal performance. They want an optimal workout. They want so we're looking at people getting higher doses than they may get just of certain nutrients than they may get just with a simple multivitamin. The wellness industry is, I think, what sprung out of some of these paradigm shifts. It's consumer-driven, and I'm grateful for that. And it's really focused on optimizing entire systems, detoxification system, antioxidant system, energy supply system. And it's not just blood flow, but cofactors and what's actually happening, on the molecular level in the body. and as well as the digestive system. We want to optimize it. We want a balance of good germs with unhealthy germs. We want to be able to absorb the nutrients that we're taking into our body. So a word about genetics. This slide may look familiar to you too, because I think it's important. Genome mapping is complete. We have completely mapped the genes, both chromosomes, the entire genome of one person, and we found a lot fewer genes than we expected. We were thinking maybe there were 200,000 genes. There are really only about 20,000. And there's a lot to this that's important. Actual genetic diseases are really quite rare. There are things we may have heard about: sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, hemochromatosis, which is people who have trouble with iron. They can't handle iron correctly, and they store it in the liver and pancreas, and it winds up damaging those organs. But they're actually fairly rare. And so what we're left with when someone says, well, I have this or that condition, don't you know it runs in the family, you have to be a little bit more open-minded about what does that really mean. Many of these things, there's maybe a genetic predisposition, but truthfully it's multifactorial. And since we know there are so much fewer genes than we thought in the first place, there's an entire new world opening up called epigenetics. And what that says is, hey, there are certain things that you do that turn on and off certain genes. And the better you take care of yourself, the more optimal that gene expression is going to be. So it's heavily influenced, we now know, by how you're exercising, by the things you're thinking, by your nutritional state, other health habits. And for more reading on that, which, I mean, it's extremely interesting stuff, because as far as I'm concerned, that changes everything. You can no longer say, well, it runs in the family, it's just going to happen to me. That's not true at all. I can't say nothing, I guess. Never say never, right? Very little that's written in your genetic code is written in stone. You have predispositions. There may be a predisposition towards needing more of this or that nutrient, but it's not written in stone. And you don't have to suffer the consequences of the bad effects of that gene if you're taking the very best care of yourself. The last thing to think about is all the cells in your body have some turnover, even your heart cells. We for years believed that sort of the heart cells were kind of stable. You didn't really produce very many more. We now know that's not true either. It's slow, but even those cells turn over. And the estimates are, even the most conservative estimate is, you have a new body about every 10 years. And the things that you're doing for that body are going to affect the health tomorrow and next week and next year. So those are the things I wanted to start out talking about. A few disclaimers of my own. None of the statements that I'm about to make have been evaluated by the FDA. There are, a second thing to think about, there are some individuals that are going to have genetic syndromes that are associated with autism spectrum disorder. And you can't actually change your genes, but we can optimize the systems in the body that are expressing those genes, that are turning those genes on and off, and that are relying on those genes so they're making the proper protein. No one thing that I'm going to talk about should be considered a magic wand. It's not like, you change a diet tonight and tomorrow everything's better. Then there's no guarantee that any single change that people will make will yield results. So I don't have anyone in my family with autism, but I recognize many of the people that are on the call or they may have friends that have children with autism, or even adults who are somewhere on the autism spectrum disorder. So hopefully this is going to be useful information. Like I say, one of my objectives is to promote your curiosity so you'll even go and look and get more information. So the question I like to ask, I said, what does cutting-edge management of autism have to do with the rest of us? One of the things I came away from the Defeat Autism Now conference with is this concept of, why are there so many epidemics? There's an epidemic of melanoma, there's an epidemic of cancer, there's an epidemic of type 2 diabetes, and there's now an epidemic of autism. When I was doing my pediatrics training in the early 1990s, I think that the numbers were something like 1 in 400. And now the estimates are something like 1 in 150. And I'm not going to get into an argument about, are we better at diagnosing, or have we shifted the bar so now people that we used to just think were ADHD, now we're going to call them autistic. That's not what this talk is about.